Hello everyone, today we are driving into the intriguing narrative on the film Passengers. A passenger's story set against the backdrop of the space journey to a distant colony planet. Our tale revolves around two main characters above the left side and right side, the Jim practicing a mechanical engineer from the Earth, and the Aura Lane, a writer and passenger from the more privileged background. First, Jim is a practical man who finds himself in an extraordinary situation when a malfunction causes him wake to up 90 years too early. For the second, the Orbital Lane, a character whose eloquent and expresses language reflects her intellectual and imaginative nature. Faced with the prospect of growing old and dying alone on the ship, Jim makes a decision to wake up on Aura. They form a bond and eventually fall in love, but their happiness is disrupted when Aura discovers the truth about her awakening. The central conflict on the film arises when Aura learns that her premature awakening was not an accident but a deliberate act by Jim. This this revelation steers their relationships and introduce moral and ethical dilemmas around loneliness, desperation, and betrayal. Adding to their predicament, the spaceship Avalon starts to experience a series of critical malfunctions threatening the lives of all passengers on board. This adds another layer of tension and urgency to their already complex situation. In sense, Passengers is a thought-provoking exploration of isolation, morality, and companionship set against the backdrop of a malfunctioning spaceship hurtling through spaces. It challenges the audience to reflect on their perceptions of right and wrong when faced with extreme circumstances. Thank you, and I look forward to discuss this film in more detail with my teammates. I was Uyong Kim from South Korea, so I have a bit accent, but please understand my situations. Thank you.
All right, my name is Cole Johnson, and I'm going to be talking about our first critical observation we noticed in the movie's Passengers, and it was about gender. And so I just want to do a quick recap. Jim is this man who's suffering greatly on this ship all alone, and he's seeking out a companion similar to Frankenstein. And that is when he spots Aurora sleeping in her sleeping pod. And it immediately becomes clear that he is desiring her, like showcasing in the perfect way male dominance in the film industry. And so he goes down this weird stalkerish rabbit hole where he finds a bunch of her videos, he reads her profile, he talks to her while she's sleeping in her pod, all of her completely, like, she is very unaware of this whole situation that's occurring. And I felt like this was a common theme, like in several movies where males are very like creepily stalking these women and stuff. And it's almost like a narcissistic and selfish way, especially selfish in this movie. And so he wakes up Aurora, which is a very poor ethical choice. I think Chris will talk about that later. And he presents this as a malfunction with her pod, similar to his. And I felt like this was a huge masculine power move. Like, he shouldn't have framed it that way. He should have just been honest because there wasn't anything that she could have done about it anyway after she was woken up. So if he was just honest from the start, it might have had less of a severe reaction. But I don't know. That's just typical masculine desire for romantic and sexual relationship, I feel like. And another thing I noticed was that they could have made this a situation where both Jim and Aurora woke up at the same time because of malfunctions, but instead they deliberately had a man wake up a woman to show that the man has power and control over the woman to wake her up, almost like a godlike figure. And this situation I kind of thought of as like a trifecta of terrible things: abduction, murder, and a forced relationship all at the same time. Because he's abducting her from her sleeping pod, forcing her awake 90 years early, and then knowing that she is going to not make it to the planet and serve the mission that she's trying to be there for. So that's basically murdering her from the start. And then also knowing that she's going to have to be his friend and be in love with him and live a life with him on this ship. Otherwise, she's going to be lonely and depressed all at the same time. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting take and perspective on this film. Another thing I noticed from the start was the professions that the directors assigned the characters. Jim is an engineer, which that's a great like a mechanical engineer if that too. And that comes in really handy towards the end of the movie when he becomes the hero of the movie and saves all 5,000 of the people. And this is no dig against journalism. I think journalism is great, but they assigned Aurora as a journalist. Like, what could she do to save this ship that's about to explode except be follow instructions told by Jim, the man? And so I thought that was really interesting. They could have made her a scientist or another engineer to be actually helpful. And then there was another male captain who they could have had be a female. And he also made some sexist remarks about how Jim is lucky to be on this ship with Aurora, implying that he is lucky because she was beautiful. And moving on to the deep dive that I went into, I found this article called "The Feminist Theory Applied to the Passengers Film," and a quote that I really like, don't say enjoyed, but thought encapsulated the movie as a whole and all the stuff I just mentioned in the previous slide, was male characters are influential decision makers around whom the action occurs. Meanwhile, the female character is passive and powerless, becoming an object of desire and control. So that, I think, was a good description of what is occurring in this movie. Another interesting thing that this article discussed was the parallel of men and women to different diets. So sexual attitudes and desires of men can be compared to like commonalities of meat eating, very common in our society in the United States anyway. And feminism can be seen as vegetarianism or kind of like threatening to society. Like you hear a lot of people be like, oh, like, why are you a vegetarian? Like, what's wrong with you? Even though there's really nothing wrong with it. And this kind of creates like a patriarchal culture where women are both seen as consumers and the consumed, which I thought was a really good analogy for both this movie and just society in general. And male dominance in the patriarchy can be disrupted by potentially, excuse me, switching the diets and placing more trust in the women with hopes of restructuring the social relationships in society. And this could be like something that could begin in films and movies and podcasts and videos and everything, where they could restructure the attitudes of people in the real world by including women as like main characters and hero bearing and not under the control of men and powerful men and male desire, and just being desirable all on their own with no men involved.
Okay, critical observation number 2. There are 2 ethical dilemmas. The movie is set up around one key moment when Jim decides to wake up another passenger, pretty much sentencing her to death. Kind of a recap, but good to set the stage. This is meant to be the tangible ethical dilemma that all the characters deal with over the course of the film. There's another ethical dilemma hidden behind the flashy Starliner Avalon. The company has no failsafe for the passengers on board. This is exhibited by Jim being stranded. Their advertising department should get paid more because the advertising shown in the film portrays the new life that they can live after going on this dangerous journey to be excellent and has no real risks. Jim Preston is shown as a lovable and scrappy character. After waking up, Jim goes through multiple stages of grief over the year that he's alone and uses relatable coping mechanisms, including excessive drinking, eating, and sleeping. When Jim decides to wake up Aurora, we are meant to feel as if he's struggling with the decision. He asks the bartender for advice. He spends his time contemplating while watching videos of her. But I think we all know that Jim, as soon as he saw her, he's already made up his mind. And this contemplation is to continue this ruse for the audience to see him as a relatable and lovable character, even though the truth is much darker, as Cole alluded to in the previous slides. So, there are only two outcomes for Jim to resolve his own guilt of sentencing another human to his reality by waking them up. One is for Jim to pass away alone and likely not be able to fix the ship, which causes 5,000 people to die. The second is what happened. Jim and Aurora fell back in love and saved the whole ship from total destruction. In the moment of Jim's decision to awake another passenger, it was done out of loneliness and despair. But in the end, it takes two people to fix the ship. Therefore, I think this should absolve Jim of his guilt because he saved 5,000 people by doing it. But since Jim is unapologetically and undeniably seen as doing the right thing all the time, he finds a way to put Aurora back into hibernation. But since there's only one pod, she refuses, and they continue to live the remaining days out on the ship together. The second, less obvious ethical dilemma is the Homestead Corporation, the parent company of the ship. Presumably, the Homestead Corporation has hundreds of these ships going to multiple planets within this world. The company is on a scale that we can only imagine today, but companies such as SpaceX and Amazon are getting pretty big. They state that there's never been a hibernation failure on any ship. I would also have to imagine that the technology for communication between the ship and Earth during flight would have been improved enough to actually send messages in any sort of reasonable time frame. So we have to presume that the company has omitted these features, such as the onboard hibernation plant, or improved communications in order to increase their profit margin. Does the slim chance of human life outweigh the savings? I believe it is cheaper to lose a life, or even 5,000, than it is to include costly safety equipment. We see evidence of this in our modern world, such as Titanic. Not enough lifeboats, lots of people died, and the ship is at the bottom of the Atlantic now. That concludes our presentation. Thank you.